Okay, so we're so excited to have MaryEllen back with us again. MaryEllen Beveridge is an honors graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. Her short stories have appeared in literary magazines, including Pembroke Magazine, the Carolina Quarterly, Other Voices, Notre Dame Review, Cottonwood, Crab Orchard Review, Louisiana Literature and War, Literature and the Arts. She's a two-time nominee for a Pushcart Prize. A previous short story collection was a finalist for the Flannery O'Connor Award for short fiction, and another was a semi-finalist for the Iowa Short Fiction Award. MaryEllen is a former member of the faculty at Emerson College, where she taught fiction, writing, and literature. Please welcome MaryEllen Beveridge. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Katie, it looks like the recording thing is hiding your face. It says the meeting is being recorded. It's up on my screen anyway.
You should be able to click a button to say okay, and that'll go away.
Oh, just got it. Okay, that's my issue. So, anyway, hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. I want to thank Katie and Jenna Anthony for inviting me to give this reading today. Also, the Blackstone Library for supporting local authors, which has been so helpful to our local community, as well as its staff for keeping our community together, especially during the last couple of years, our last few years where we've seen so much of each other virtually. And it's been good that the libraries helped us through. This is my second reading at the library. The first one was when my first book came out, my first collection, After the Hunger, and Permeable Boundaries, which I'll read from today, is my second collection. And they were both published by Fomite Press in Burlington, Vermont. And I wanted to say hello to Donna Bister and welcome her and ask if she'd like to say a few words. She's been so instrumental to my publication.
Sure, and I'd like to second MaryEllen's thanks to the library. You know, small publishers like us really don't have a lot of resources for getting books out there after they're published, and we really depend on the local libraries and local independent bookstores to support our authors. And I'd also like to say about MaryEllen's books in particular, it's really hard for someone who writes short stories to get collections published unless they're famous already. And early in we're now in our 10th year, we decided that we were going to have a focus on that we would make a concerted effort to publish story collections from people who were not as well known. And MaryEllen sent us a manuscript that was like 700 pages of stories or something like that. And my husband, Mark, who's acquisitions and editor, said, I think we got 2 books here. So we're really pleased that they're both getting the recognition that they deserve. And thanks so much for hosting, and take it away, MaryEllen.
Okay, Donna, thank you. I just wanted to say as well that for both of these collections, most of the stories are set in New England, where I grew up, and I'm so familiar with it. Love the landscape, even this moody winter landscape we're experiencing right now. But the story I'm reading today takes place in New York City, just to give you that setting. So I'll read, and after that, it would be nice to, if anyone has comments or questions, I'll be happy for them. So just to let you know, I think this is going to take about a half an hour. And the story is Italy or Florida. Her young Italian man took the change Lena placed on the counter and massaged it in his broad palm. His stained white apron emphasized his narrow waist and the muscled arms crossed over his chest. He would not speak English to her, and he would not meet her eyes, but he had her order ready as she walked into the pizza stand, a slice steaming on wax paper and a Coke without ice, even in the heat of summer. When she turned to find a seat, he pressured paying customers out of a booth with a few overbearing gestures of a dirty handy wipe. Lena knew that if she tried to talk to him, she would break some centuries-old Mediterranean code. So she said thank you, and he nodded to her without looking at her. She took a bite of the best pizza in Lower Manhattan. The room was warm and yeasty. The oven door slammed and the ceiling fan whirred, and Lena, mesmerized, sipped her uniced Coke and closed her eyes. She concentrated on the place behind her eyelids, orange as opium poppies, while the noise and movement of the pizza stand surged by her like black dots in her field of vision. A shift in the light in the room, Lena opened her eyes. Two men stood near her in an unbroken silhouette. An arm was draped over the back of her booth. A hand with a dull metal ring on one finger held a cup of Coke. The men breathed her air, waiting. She looked up into two pairs of eyes, green, green-blue, at a faint curl at the turn of a mouth. What do you want, she said, not knowing whether she said it out loud or said it to herself. What do you want? The heat made her lightheaded. The small booth became even smaller. The muscles in her back tightened. One of the men moved to flank her, and she stood, defending her booth against them, defending herself against them. We didn't see you, he said, one of them said. Sorry, he said. And they turned away. The light shifted back. The space around her was neutral again. Lena sat down and exhaled. She looked quickly at her young Italian man, guiding a widening circle of dough on one straight finger. The two men sat at the counter now, drinking their Cokes. Lena rolled the wax paper into her empty cup and threw it in the trash on her way out the door. Her young Italian man avoided her eyes as she left. It was a long trip uptown. Lena could never understand how 4 miles took 45 minutes. The air outside was no relief from the subway. She walked farther east, almost to the river, but she was dressed for it. Sneakers and cotton socks, good for a sprint if that became necessary. A t-shirt and a pair of loose pants, dark, so the subway wouldn't show, or the places where strangers had touched her. She rang a buzzer and climbed the 5 flights of stairs in an aging brownstone that had been converted to apartments, 2 to every floor. Ivy grew up the facades of all the buildings on the block except the high-rises on each corner, a reminder of how the city was going. Before she knocked on the door, she lifted her hair from the nape of her neck and pulled her clothes from her body where they had stuck to it. Then she smoothed everything down again. The man who answered was brown, like Lena, brown hair, brown eyes, brown joint hanging between his lips, unlit. He kept one there most of the time, except when he was smoking cigarettes or eating or making love. Lena had come to believe it was his talisman against all that he found himself among lately, as a fur coat with a moth-eaten sweater underneath, or late-night movies on TV were to others. He was just a few inches taller than Lena, so they fit together nicely, while he still claimed the masculine advantage of size. He took her face in his hands and kissed her as if she had delivered herself to him, a present. He did not forget to remove the half-burned joint from his lips. Craig's body had gone somewhat to softness around the chest, but it was good to lean into. He was a mostly out-of-work carpenter, even though his life was in a state of neglect, in a state of disrepair, and he did nothing that she could see to redeem it. She felt from him a protectiveness that came from an unlimited decency toward her, or a decency whose limits she had not yet pushed. Craig traced a line at Lena's temple with his fingertips and brought her a beer already sweating from the refrigerator. We have a half hour to ourselves, he said. How are you? Hot, dirty, summer in the city. How are you? Good to see you. What startled Lena was that she was quite capable of forgetting him for weeks at a time, then coming to when he called her. On Friday, he had whispered roughly into the mouthpiece of his telephone at the other end of the line. I've been drinking Glenlivet Scotch today, he said. Quite good, unblended. Will I see you tomorrow? They sat close together on Craig's feather couch with their beers. Lena settled her shoulders against his chest and was empty of everything but warmth and calm. He put his hand around hers. Trouble is, he said, I'm lonely without them, and I can't do a damn thing with them. Cut off till they're back with their mother. Lena tried to see him when his children weren't visiting. His children terrified her. No one other person she knew in New York had children. Working at jobs the agencies found for her under lights that hurt her eyes, she stood in front of the office Xerox machine and sterilized herself. hips pressed against it discreetly, not suggestively. Every time the light flashed, one of her woman's cells, oh curse, oh joy, like a pure marble, rolled away. Craig wanted her to see his plants, and she was glad because she was tired of thinking about children. When she thought too much about children, she began to think she might have children of her own somewhere, say in Italy or Florida, or some other place where she had left any number of troublesome desires. Craig filled 2 metal buckets with water and fertilizing compound, and they walked the length of the apartment to the front room. The once beautiful rooms had gone to ruin. Craig had bought the apartment when the building went co-op, and with the pride of ownership, he had torn it apart, installing, removing, widening, lengthening. Now nothing was finished. The kitchen cabinets had no doors and were stuffed with odds and ends that didn't belong in kitchen cabinets, and with small round paper bags from the health food store marked raisins and almond flour pancake mix. The stainless steel sink worked, but the butcher block counter ended abruptly, and dirty baking pans, frying pans, dishes, cups, and utensils crowded off it in an ingenious arrangement which had assured so far that they didn't fall onto the floor. The pile of clean laundry on Craig's bed sagged toward the pile of dirty laundry on the floor. In large closet spaces, sheetrock and taped, had been abandoned without paint or doors. The bathroom sink was missing. The surfaces of the furniture were littered, and drawers were half opened and bulging with papers, string, and coupons, store coupons, t-shirts, and safety pins. Among all this, a pot of beans simmered on the stove. In the front room, heavy black cloth covered the windows, secured to the moldings by 2 penny nails. Scores of thriving marijuana plants set into portable wooden frames were nurtured by frequent waterings and 8-foot fluorescent light bulbs suspended from the ceiling by a maze of wires, more of Craig's handiwork. Lena bent over the plants and admired the brushstroke oriental quality of the leaves. Craig caressed them as if they were already the wad of $100 bills they would become. After they get this tall, he measured the air, I transplant them to an estate in New Jersey. Nobody will find the land I cleared. The woods go on and on. Craig's eyes went dark as if he were thinking of another kind of woods altogether. I have to walk about a mile through the brush to get there. If I walk steady enough through the night, I'm on the highway again by dawn. He lifted a bucket and wet the dark soil. When I got back and couldn't find work, he said, a buddy of mine hired me to harvest his plants. It's the most dangerous time. You're red-handed if you're caught. He paid me $500 a day. I bought a box of rubber bands, and at the end of every week, I snapped one around all those $100 bills. By the time the harvest was in, I'd used up the whole box. He trusted her now with this. Craig was one of the elect whose service in Vietnam had later given him an almost regular source of income. He surveyed the healthy green room and sighed. The garden state doesn't do too badly by those seeds from Nam, he said. Craig finished watering the plants while Lena went to the refrigerator and tried to decide between beer and orange juice, its only contents. They took fresh beers to the couch. Craig switched on a fan at their feet and cleared a space at the coffee table. Lena threw newspapers and crumpled cigarette packs to the floor and lay in luxury on the couch. Craig's chaos was inviting and so pervasive that all she could do was give in, maybe coax it along. His chaos had overwhelmed him to inertia, although he said he had stopped working on the apartment only until the divorce settlement. There was a chance it would go to his wife, and then she could have it, he said, the whole damn thing. Lena moved her legs and the fan ruffled her pants. Craig pulled around a bulging trash bag full of shake and rummaged through it. There is some buds in here, I know it, he said into the trash bag. The crop in the front room was his hope for the future. He crumpled the buds into cigarette papers while Lena laid down a row of neatly rolled joints. They smoked the first joint, and he told her how many plants would flower, how tall they would grow, what they would be worth. He puffed tenderly on the joint, then looked at the room just abstractedly. Most of it will probably go to my lawyer, though, he said. The buzzer rang. He stood heavily and buzzed back. They heard high, excited voices on the stairs, 2 of them, and a third, a man saying, come on, Abby, come on, Roseanne. Craig gave Lena a split-focused look, the pride of a father and the regrets of a lover, and opened the door. The man on the other side of it was taller than Craig, leaner. He wore white trousers and a yellow sports shirt and exuded an oppressive health. He looked at Lena from the doorway with detached curiosity. She went back to her beer as Craig exchanged a few words with him, and Roseanne took Roseanne in his arms and rested his hand on Abby's glorious blonde hair. Suddenly, all the other objects among the chaos claimed Lena's vision: dolls, blocks, coloring books, pickup sticks, children's clothes, the smell of baby powder. Craig smiled at his children through the joint in his mouth as if they, not it, had drugged him. The man said something to Craig and stepped around the clutter to the kitchen sink where he washed his hands of everything and left. Craig took his children to Lena. He filled Roseanne's bottle with orange juice and they all sat on the couch in a row. He said, Abby, Roseanne, you remember Lena, don't you? Roseanne attended to her bottle. Abby smiled at Lena openly, guilelessly. Lena smiled back. Abby shifted her weight closer to her father while Lena told her how they had met. I took your daddy's phone number from a notice on a bulletin board. He brought his tools to my apartment. His hammer, yes, and his tape measure and level and paint. Do you know what he did then? He tore down a wall so I'd have more room to pace. This was lost on Abby. She shifted her weight again and Lena sensed danger, but it was Abby who was threatened, who did not want to hear that a man she was so erratically dependent upon, lived in ways that excluded her. Abby said, I'm hot, Daddy. I'm hungry. Lena said to her, would you like me to help you find another dress? No. Craig took his children to their room. Lena went to the stove and stirred the beans, checked the hydrator, and sliced a carrot into the pot. The steam made her face sweat. Tendrils of hair stuck to her skin. She wound her hair in her hands, a nervous gesture justified by the heat. She trailed down the hallway and asked Abby if she could borrow a few barrettes. Craig was buttoning her into another dress. Roseanne rolled on the rug with her bottle. Abby smiled at Lena again in a feminine complicity. Lena stood patiently while Abby paired all of her barrettes and finally chose the red ones. Lena sat on the bed while Abby tried to fasten them to her hair. Lena took a strand from each temple and held the rest back and showed Abby how to fasten the barrettes. Abby smoothed Lena's hair, patting it. It was full of snarls, long and full of snarls. Lena just washed it and let it go. She waited in front of the fan until Craig was ready. The children followed him everywhere, breathless little shadows in collision with each other. He disappeared down the hallway in search of his keys, returned to the coffee table, brushed stray marijuana into the trash bag, and ripped the paper off the top of the pack of Camels to insert the joints into the pack. Abby was at his heels calling, Daddy, Daddy, and Roseanne lagged behind, coming upon the last maneuver as the next was about to begin. Craig shut the flame under the pot of beans. With silent apologies to Lena, he lifted his children into his arms and carried them out the door, quiet now, content. Lena closed the door and followed them downstairs. Craig sat Abby down on the sidewalk. She tried to force his attention with a rush of words, high and insistent. Roseanne threw her head from side to side. A flywheel came loose in Lena's brain. Abby suddenly abandoned the argument she was trying to have with her father, leaving them in a low-pressure zone, absent of sound. Craig said, Abby, take my hand. She took the hand he had put around Lena's waist, and they all straggled up the avenue. Lena swept her hair meditatively over one shoulder. The noise of the traffic became another layer of heat. Yellow taxi cabs rolled down 2nd Avenue, distorted by the wave of heat rising from the asphalt. Enough of the cabs were empty. If she walked to the curb and raised her arm, one would stop for her. If Craig had blonde hair, their foursome might look more authentic. Or if she had blonde hair, or if one of the children had brown hair. Craig finished another joint, but no one was looking at them. Lena was protected by these children and this man, isolated by them. For a while, she was safe. The movie house vibrated with the noise of excited children that became a low hum then silenced when the lights began to dim. In the lobby, Craig balanced tickets, popcorn, candy, soda, children. Lena's arms were empty, a burden. The adults walked down the carpeted aisles, some with 5 or 6 children in tow. Other adults somewhere in the neighborhood were relieved for the afternoon. It would be their turn next. There were single men, single women with a child or two or three, a few bona fide sets of parents. Lena checked eyes, hair, thickness of bones. Some like Craig and Lena. Lena felt unseen, flattened out. Craig was on the aisle seat with Roseanne on his lap, and Lena sat between Craig and Abby. Catherine, Abby said, may I trade places with you? Her name is Lena, Abby, Craig said. You know that. No, Lena said, on principle, quite clearly through her mouth full of popcorn. Who was Catherine? Catherine. Now Lena was having an argument with a 5-year-old. Abby let go with a beautifully modulated whine, punctuated by little sobs. It is like a song, Lena thought, musical despair. Abby spilled Coke on Lena's pants. Craig and Lena moved down one aisle, and Abby sat triumphantly next to her father. Lena took his hand, fearing she would lose herself in the tiny urgencies of the children who surrounded them, but he was off in a haze of marijuana. He wrapped his hand around hers. Roseanne settled against his chest, dreamily sucking her bottle. Abby paid close attention to Snow White. Lena frowned into her popcorn. Craig said nothing. If one woman had divided his family, surely he wouldn't allow it again. Abby knew this instinctively. Lena came to Craig from the cool extravagance of her neighborhood, where she had a lover who was quite glamorous in the source of his income, the vintage of his drinks, the cut of his clothing. He was unaware of how well he entertained her. He was expert at arranging dinner, hailing a cab, buying a newspaper and folding it under his arm, all at a half run, just so. He was quite upset at the look of her apartment. How could she possibly entertain, he asked her in his meticulously cultivated Eastern voice. He wagged certain ancestral bones at her, like the barrel of a rifle. He was often disappointed in her. Lena eased her hand from Craig's and drifted into the lobby. A sizable ebb and flow of little bodies, sometimes accompanied by bigger ones, giggled and fretted there. She had seen enough of the film: betrayal, flight, rescue, revenge, salvation. A room full of unendings watched the happy ending. The prince kissed Snow White, and as she gazed into his eyes, an infant screamed in the front row. They straggled into the afternoon heat and low, humid sky. Lena bumped along next to Craig, slow to regain her equilibrium. He said, "You have Coke on your pants," and grinned at his children. He started acting dopey and shy like Dopey, and caught each of them in his big arms, planting Bronx cheers on the soft skin of their necks. Their voices pierced Lena's eardrums as they struggled away from him and returned for more. "Kiss me, Daddy," Abby said. "Kiss me like the prince kissed Snow White." Her arms wrapped possessively around his thighs. Her smile was more enchanting than Lena imagined hers could ever be. "Abby, Abby," Craig said, helpless. He didn't seem to have the strength to take her arms away. Lena was afraid Abby would bury her face in his loins. "Ish, ish," Roseanne breathed, catching her fingers in Craig's pant leg. Lena stood back, pretending she was just passing by. Craig picked up Roseanne and kissed her cheek, brushing her delicate skin with his rough face. Then he kissed Abby, who no longer clung to his legs. Craig pulled Lena to him and kissed her. Impulsively, Abby drew Lena's face to hers. Lena kissed her in return. She leaned against Craig, comforted by the texture of his hair and skin, then gathered herself together and wandered down the avenue with Craig and his children, blessed for the moment, if not saved. They went to the courtyard behind Craig's apartment building, where he had built a swing set and a sandbox among the flowering sumac that thrived in all the untended corners of the city. The children fanned out through stunted shrubbery and wilted hollyhocks to play on the swings. Roseanne couldn't climb onto a swing by herself, so she walked instead with giant baby steps to the sandbox. Abby paid her no mind. Craig led Lena to a bench under unclipped hedges and kissed her hands, her mouth. With a child's prescience, Abby called through the hedges to her father, "Daddy, Daddy." As Craig and Lena moved apart, their t-shirts clung together, then fell back. "When do your children sleep?" Lena said. "It's only afternoon." "They must take naps. Young bodies tire quickly, I understand, go, and then practically drop to the floor." Softly, she was pulling the hair at the nape of his neck. "First they get cranky," he said, standing up. "I'll be right there, Abby. They'll know when they're tired." Craig did underdogs with Abby, pushing her swing hard and running under it on the upswing. She shrieked convulsively. Lena sat at the edge of the sandbox. Sand glued by sweat streaked Roseanne's face and arms. She walked unsteadily to Lena, a toy shovel in her hand, and said, "Mama," but it was not Lena. "Yes, I know," Lena told her. Upstairs, the fan barely moved the air. Lena set the beans on simmer again, found an onion in a cabinet, and sliced it into the pot. She settled again on the feathered couch. The beans were done, and all was quiet downstairs. Maybe, Lena thought, they have dropped to the ground in the heat, circled around each other. She drew a bath and lay in front of the fan while the tub filled. Abby found Lena in her room, pinning her hair with Abby's barrettes. She looked at Lena with her beatific smile and said, "Are you a friend of my daddy's?" Lena thought for a moment. Yes, she said, she could say that, until she found herself knocking up against his stone peaceful silences, and he said, "Come in," and she did, and there was nothing but his guerrilla farming and beer and Glenlivet scotch the day before the children arrived. But for now, it was all right. "Yes," she said again, "I'm a friend of your daddy's." She finished pinning her hair. They had dinner in front of the fan. Beans stuck to the couch, the children's skin. Craig appropriated Lena's bath for the children. He helped Roseanne out of her clothes. Abby undressed fluidly and flitted about the room, her long hair falling to her sturdy golden bottom. Roseanne wriggled from Craig's lap and ran with Abby, looking seductively back at him while her mouth pulled at her bottle. Abby flirted with her father, rocking her body in front of him and running off when he tried to take her arm. A nymph with perfect untouched flesh who delighted in the chase. A part of Lena moved, ran with them until their dance was eclipsed by Craig's hand touching her cheek. He found them in their bedroom. They played a game of hide and seek, the children at full shriek. Abby and Roseanne emerged from the hallway high off the floor, helpless but unaware of it in Craig's arms. He bathed them while Lena relieved the couch and coffee table of dishes and bean soup. She spread herself on the couch, the fan adjusted at its foot. The thick air became denser as the sun faded. She lay in shadow that had its own weight and form. The children came to Lena through a veil of light from the bathroom. The drain gurgled as Craig shifted the plastic toys to let the water through. They had towels draped over their heads, and she sat up so they could stand between her knees. She toweled them, running the thick cloth through the damp ends of their hair. Roseanne's curled around her face, Abby's a long, light wave. This is what they did when Craig and his wife were together. She knew that. He bathed them and she toweled them dry, and he got their pajamas, and they both helped the children into them. Abby got her hairbrush and sat on the couch. She was perfectly still while Lena slowly worked the tangles from her hair and braided it. Her hair, always blonde, was white, ash, yellow, a pale glow in the shadowed room. Lena took a barrette from her hair and clipped the end of her braid. Abby unfastened the rest of the barrettes from Lena's hair and brushed it. When she was done, it looked smooth, but underneath the tangles were untouched. Abby talked to her father about Snow White, secure in his lap as if there were nothing in the world but her father's face and hers for him. Lena took Roseanne to the kitchen and refilled her bottle. When she returned, he looked away from his daughter to her and said, "After all that," gesturing toward the door, the day, the messy apartment, "this always comes." He circled Abby's body with his arms. Lena slept on the couch with Craig and his children, none of them hers. The fan stirred the edges of their clothes. Downtown, Lena's lover was furious at her, but he had probably called someone else by now. She walked beside him in high heels, small steps so the pinks wouldn't show. She wore a brilliant red smile and an elegant dress, black. Lena would wonder if this woman found her lover entertaining too. Their four bodies formed a long, irregular chain. Where they didn't touch Lena, her skin was cold. Abby fell to the floor like a ripe peach. Craig lifted her and took Roseanne from Lena's arms and brought them quietly to their room. She drew another bath and laid the plastic toys on the floor. He brought emergency candles and 2 cans of beer. They dripped wax on the porcelain at the foot of the tub and set the candles in, shut the light, and relaxed into the water. He soaked her legs, gently lifting one, then the other, running his large hands along her thighs. She leaned against his chest and closed her eyes. The floor in front of the couch was the place they had discovered only tonight. They turned the fan toward their bodies, and she was warm where he touched her, cool under the fan's breeze. Finally, she knew only that he warmed her, came to her. When she was herself again, she began to understand how only the unequivocally blessed or unblessed could hope to limit their progeny, how little bodies could worry, demand, exhaust two people onto the floor, hungry for this. The children came to them one by one, Roseanne first crying from her room. Craig brought her to him and lay her between them on the bed, the clean laundry now fallen onto the dirty laundry. Roseanne sucked noisily at her bottle. Later, Abby screamed and ran to Craig. It was the scream of a child used to sleeping against the bodies of her family who realized she was alone. Now both children slept between them as if they were in possession of the knowledge that on the other side of lovemaking lay their coming. Craig lazily smoked a Camel, gazing down in the darkness at them. Lena lay on her side, connected to his family by a knee, a shoulder, the tips of her fingers. She tried to imagine waking with Abby lying in the hollow of her belly, her face against the child's hair. She reclaimed her limp clothes from the couch. Craig followed her into the room where she stood, futilely trying to cuff the wrinkles out of her pants. They always sleep with me now, he said. She turned away from him and tied the laces of her sneakers. Craig went back to his room to rummage through the clean, dirty laundry for a fresh t-shirt and a pair of pants. He walked her to a cab, an untranslatable silence between them. The cabs were abundant, fast-moving. Lena wondered suddenly what she must look like. Craig touched her face as the cab braked for them. "Your hair looks nice," he said, and shut the door of the cab securely for her. Downtown, she asked the driver to stop at the cross street below the pizza stand. Her young Italian man was there. When did he sleep, play? He flourished his wooden spatula and slammed the oven door behind him. The ceiling fan whirred slowly. He lay a steaming pie on the counter and artfully cut it into pieces. Then he slipped a slice onto a piece of wax paper, filled a cup with Coke. It fizzled over the lip of the cup. Lena reached for them and he stepped back, folding his arms across his chest. She lay a handful of change on the counter and said, "Grazie." He nodded to her and said, "Niente." "Pensare, I come here to do that." "Si, pensare, I know." She saw his shoulders relax. She took what he had given her to her booth. She sipped her uniced Coke and thought. She thought she would go back to her rooms now. She would think about Italy or Florida and keep all her lights burning until they blazed out like ash in a cold fire, then stoke it once again. The end. So, thank you for that, Katie. Do we have any questions or comments?
Would you read the final sentence again?
Do you want me to read the final paragraph? It's sort of
That would
wraps
be
it.
even better.
Okay.
Yeah,
You're also kind. I wish I were a professional reader, but I'm not. But here I go. I'll read this again. So the man in the pizza parlor understands she's come here to think. He seems to have understood that all along. It reads, she took what he had given her to her booth. She sipped her uniced Coke and thought. She thought she would go back to her rooms now. She would think about Italy or Florida and keep all her lights burning until they blazed out like ash in a cold fire, then stoke it once again.
Thank you.
okay. I had to go in and out of this, because I'm dealing with some family things, but it made me definitely want to read this story again myself and more slowly. And the
Okay.
beginning made me think about my childhood when I visited relatives in New York and what their homes looked like,
Yeah.
what the booths and the counters and everything in the coffee shops.
Yeah, definitely a New York story for sure.
It's very evocative of an era too that I think most of us can remember. And when we see how times have changed and he's so careful to conceal his illegal marijuana activities, and now, of course, it's no big deal at all,
No, I know.
which is an
Right.
interesting contrast.
Yes, well, I do want to say this about actually both collections because they were written over time. And I think an issue with short stories is, the attempt anyway to connect them thematically. I mean, I've read that often people have difficulty doing that, and perhaps the collection doesn't feel as coherent. So this is I think though the first collection really had more to do with the adult children of World War II veterans, which I am,
Right.
and the idea of the sort of incomplete family. This idea of sort of the missing family member and absent family member, especially around veterans who are either absent emotionally or they're absent, physically, or sometimes both. So most of those stories hung together that way. And then, and when Donna talked about that earlier, these stories that they so generously published almost all of my stories. I think Mark didn't want about 4 out of 30. So the others were published in these two books. But looking over this whole collection and trying to see how it worked together, you always have to write the blurb on the back of the collection. What's it about? And it did seem to me that a lot of them, most of them, were about the protagonists, and they're all female protagonists. I think this examination is sort of a female consciousness, and they all seem to me to be sort of attempting to look for a center, a place, and how that was working for them, and how, what circumstances there were in their lives that would make them ask these questions, that they all become, seekers in a way. So I think what this character Lena is doing as well is, kind of the same thing. Obviously not very well placed yet, I think, but sort of seeking a place for herself in the world, however that's going to work for her, seen through this day she spends with this man and his young children. So that's what I think more what this collection is about.
Yeah. Something like past and present almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've seen those. Not as deeply in the past and present as your book, After the Hunger. That kind of brought it way in the past, then way in the present.
Oh, because of the idea of the adult children of veterans, maybe.
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
Yeah. So.
Are the other stories, are they related to the same character, or are they all very different in this collection?
They're all very different. They don't follow one character. There are 3 or 4 stories that take place in New York, though. That's about as close as they get to being related. So that's all. I think most of them are written about New England. So, and a few about New York.
Most of them in New England, did you say?
Yeah, most of them in New England.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was surprised to hear that this was set in New York. I mean, that's where Paul and I met, and we lived in New York, and
Yeah.
remember, that.
All those slices of pizza
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
and Cokes.
And Cokes for sure. Yeah.
And 42nd Street.
Yeah.
Greenwich Village.
Yep.
That's great.
Yeah, because I grew up in Rockland County, which is outside of New York.
Okay, yeah.
There's nothing like a hot summer day in New York. Oh
Oh my goodness, no, there
Yes.
isn't. Oh, yeah, you really captured that feeling. that
Yes,
that stickiness and not having enough fans or air conditioning. And,
Mhm.
ooh.
Yeah.
right. And reminding how people got out of New York to go to the bungalows, because I lived where there was a lot of bungalow colonies.
Yeah, just to get away. If there are there any other comments or questions at this moment? For now, I did have some notes I wanted to share with you. One thing that was just pointed out to me actually after I wrote the story, that last paragraph, someone, actually it was Tim Mahoney, I think you're here, would know this, Lynn Sharon Schwartz was mentioning this to me, this idea at the end that it feels like the hearth in a way, this cold, ash in a cold fire. And the idea of the hearth is sort of the center of the family, the central image of the family and sharing the communion over food and so forth. And this book, I have lots of books here on my table, but this is a book that I taught fairly recently. It's if you can see, it's Go Down Roses by William Faulkner. And many of these stories have the hearth as a central image. It's very interesting. And if the hearth is going, the family is cohesive and working and successful to whatever degree. But there's often a cold hearth, and things are not going well. So the hearth
Right.
is very symbolic of the condition of the family. So I wanted to point that out. And the other thing that I've always been interested in, I just started noticing that some writers actually of fiction start talking about the research they were doing. And I think it's probably true of a lot of fiction writers. We're still going to sources to help us with our writing. And recently, you probably all know Coulson Whitehead. He's talked in interviews about doing research for two of his recent books, The Underground Railroad and The Nickel Boys. And I think maybe his most recent book is called Harlem Shuffle. These are all novels. And he talked about actually interviewing his mother to do research for this book, because I think she grew up in Harlem. So he was getting a lot of his information from a family member, which I found very interesting. And then I've been reading some Michael Adonje, if you know him. This book is called Warlight, and it's actually about a now grown man who's trying to understand his mother's role during World War II. She seems to have been some sort of a secret agent in England, but a lot of it has to do with these if I'm remembering correctly, these sort of illegitimate boats on these tributaries of the Thames River. So he did a lot of research. He lists a lot of books he read at the back of this book to help him write this novel. And then this one I read very, very recently. It's another one of his called Running in the Family. And his family, part of his family is from, he calls it Ceylon when he was there, Sri Lanka. And I was interested because I thought he's gonna do this again. He's gonna list the research. But what he did was mostly interview family members as well to help him write this book. So I found that very interesting. So I think that people are often going to resources, whatever they are, their books or family members or however they're composing their own work. And I guess I'll stop talking if anybody would like to make a comment. Are there any more comments or questions? Or I can go on, I guess. But another
What
thing.
sort of research do you do when you write your short stories?
Well, this collection, I don't think I really did a lot of research. I knew New York very well. I had lived there for a number of years. I didn't seem to do too much that I can think of offhand. I do I want to always make sure that I get objects that I'm using in a story that they're used correctly. So I go to I have a lot of books that I use just for research. I can show them to you. I've got them here. This is another shout out to my friend Tim because his wife Allison recommended this book. It's a beautiful book called Coastal Plants from Cape Cod to Cape Canaveral. And I think the idea of naming things is so important. You can sort of take ownership of something when you can name it. And also, I think it's very helpful to have this kind of detail in any kind of work you're doing. And this is another one I used more in the first collection, but this is called A Guide to New England's Landscape. It's kind of wonderful, the whole sort of glacial turmoil that New England was forged out of. And here's another kind of a beautiful one. This is the stars and planets. It's very pretty. So a lot of what I work on has to do with nature. The first book in this collection that I read from, there's a woman trying to do Tai Chi and not doing very well at it, which is my story as well, I must say. And this was given to me. It's a Tai Chi primer. It's got a lot of pictures in it. So that was helpful to me when I was writing the first story in the collection. It's called Needle at Sea Bottom, which is one of the Tai Chi moves. So I do go to a lot of, as many sources as I can find to help me with these kind of details to make the work seem more believable in a way.
I would think, oh, sorry. Yeah, I would think that by writing some of these short stories and historical fiction, you would have to know what was going on at that time. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, that
Right.
first collection I have a lot of books up on the bookshelf. I hadn't pulled them down, but there are a lot of books about specific aspects of the war, because there was one story where one of the characters was a survivor of the Bataan death march, that awful death march. And so I have like 2 or 3 books that I read just to help me write that one story. So absolutely, whenever there's anything historical, I try to be as believable as I can when I'm writing the fiction.
Right, because a lot of times the names are changed in historical fiction, but the events that happened, it relates to what really happened, but it's different
Yeah,
people.
the actual events for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I did want to say this too about writing and the era I came from. We weren't reading a lot of women writers, which I realized that's mostly what I was interested in, Michael Odanje aside, I guess. And so that took a while for me to discover these writers, this kind of work that's been so important to me, to see, how the woman's female consciousness is sort of articulated by various writers. And I have a whole pile of books here, but I did want to mention this one. Jane Ann Phillips is a contemporary of mine. This is one of the first books I was reading a while ago. Black Tickets is a series of short stories, and it really helped me take ownership in a way of my own experience, just reading her book. I have a lot of other books that are older ones too, very important books by like Kate Chopin and Charlotte Perkins Gilman, all the older ones as well. But this is the one that really started me. I think there's an idea sometimes that if you're not exposed to work by women, how do you begin to find your own, how do you give yourself permission to start to do this writing? How do you see that others' experience is in some way or another similar to your own, and that you can have a voice too to contribute to that experience. So I just wanted to bring that up as well, how reading certain writers has been important to me. Certainly reading writers other than women as well has been very important, just in terms of technique, putting putting stories together. But these women writers have been very important as well. So just to mention that.
All right. Take care. I have to, gotta run. Thanks, MaryEllen. I gotta run.
Okay.
Thanks.
I just wanted to say, hi, MaryEllen.
Hi, Fran. How are you?
I'm doing well. The thing I love about your stories is they are so descriptive. Like, I feel like I can just close my eyes and I'm right there. You know, it's so immersive. The sights, the sounds, the smells, you know, what people are doing, how they're interacting. But I wanted to know about your characters. Like, do you base them on, you know, are bits and pieces from people that you know or have encountered or anything like that? Or do you just kind of use your imagination?
Well, I think that I've said this before, like writers are great thieves. I think Joe Didion said that. And I think we're always looking for, in this field, I think anyone in whatever field they're in, they're always on a kind of a quest. And I think, you know, writers are always looking for a story in whatever shape or form. And so I think I tend to, there's some trigger, something, and then a story sort of emerges from that. Like with this story I read, I've seen this here and there. We've probably, a lot of us have probably experienced this. Small children who get very jealous of their parents. They don't want their parents' attention going anywhere but to them, which I found a very interesting dilemma for the, you know, the outsiders in the family. And so that's what started me in a way to write this story. And then I think that this main character was at some kind of crossroads, but this just began to emerge. I don't think you really know it all when you start working on something. Like I just start with an idea and then it starts to, other things start to emerge. But she was certainly at that point where she was a seeker too, of like a center, whatever that was. It still seemed to be emerging for her. But this idea of this recurring phrase of Italy or Florida, you know, this idea that she had left children behind, and it was a sort of a, you know, this thought that kept recurring for her while she was still trying to avoid even the responsibility for these children who weren't even hers. So that sort of emerged after this idea, this thing that I've heard of and witnessed of young children being very jealous of their parents' time. So that's sort of how it started as well. So that's what happens. I think we're always looking for a story, and for me, it starts with something smaller and then something emerges from that.
So would you say that you mold the character to fit the situation that you're thinking about? For instance, did Lena emerge from this idea that you had about, or I guess I should say, did she take shape around this idea that you had of the children and how jealous they are of their parents?
Yeah, they might have been happening at once, because I think that this moment in time that people have as well about how their lives are going to unfold. And I think these children kind of forced her to think about that a little bit more. So I guess that's the best way I can answer that question. They seem to emerge simultaneously. There is discussion about whether something is more character driven or plot driven or whatever, but I certainly am paying a lot of attention to these characters and their own response to their environment and their own development over the course of the story as well. So I don't know if I answered that completely, but
Yes, you did. Thank you.
are there any other comments or questions? I don't know if I have anything more to talk about with my books and everything. Well, I have some epigraphs, and this is kind of an amazing book. It's called The Sacred and Profane, the Nature of Religion. And the epigraph I took from this book is really about how we create a center for ourselves. We sort of found the world with ourselves. We're sort of the center of the world. And I've heard about creation stories, and what I found most interesting about them, of course, it makes perfect sense, but the center one creates, or the center one is discussing, is always right there. You know, every group has its own creation of the world story, but it's always to do with them, you know. So I think that his name's Mircea Eliade, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's written a lot of amazing books, but he talks about us individually as well. He talks about religious man, actually, this idea of the creating a center, a sacred space in a way, a place where we belong, is sort of a individual effort as well as a community effort. So I loved using a quote from his book as with the epigraph. And then I'm very thankful I save books endlessly. This was a book from grad school. It's called Zen and the Art of Archery by Eugene Herrigel. And he talks as well about the art of archery being really a contest with yourself, not with your opponent. So I thought that was a lovely quote to use as well, as people are sort of on this quest for a place in the world too. So. Are there any other comments? We're going over the hour a little tiny bit too. I didn't know if there are any wrap up questions or comments anybody wanted to make. Well, I should thank everyone for coming, and it was my honor and pleasure to share this hour with you.
Thank you so much for sharing, MaryEllen. That was lovely, and it's really interesting to hear kind of where you take the inspiration and just the variety of books that you read, and it's always interesting kind of peeking into the mind of somebody who produces something creative. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much, Katie.
Thank you, MaryEllen.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, MaryEllen.
Thanks, Fran.
Thank you. Very nice. Very descriptive, inspirational.
Nice to see you, Nancy and Paul.
Ditto.
Maybe someday in person.
Oh, yes, let's do it this spring.
Fingers crossed.
Looking up.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, well, everybody have a lovely rest of your afternoon, and thank you again for joining us. Take care. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Katie. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.